Welcome to the next and last episode of Agency Edition. This has been a toggle series for agency leaders who want to grow their business. Today, I'm talking to Brooklin Nash, co-founder of Beam Content. If you're in agency world, you've probably seen Brooklyn's name pop up on LinkedIn. I'm really excited about today's episode because Brooklin actually built Beam in public, and he shares in today's chat about how organic thought leadership content and consistent presence on LinkedIn has helped Beam build a steady pipeline of inbound leads. Brooklin also shared some pretty cool tips for agency leaders about how its personality-driven approach to LinkedIn content helps keep the agency top of mind for prospects, how they price up projects profitably, and in Brooklyn's own words, why they knock back some projects that they deem too big so it doesn't mess with the agency's systems. He also broke down Beam's transparent onboarding process for new clients and how they scale by forecasting months ahead instead of scrambling for new deals. So here's my conversation with Brooklin Nash. All right, Brooklin, why don't you give us a little kickoff about who you are and who Beam is?
So I'm Brooklin Nash, one of the co-founders of Beam Content. Been in business for almost 3 years. At least launched as Beam Content. I started out my content path, career journey, whatever you want to call it, just over 10 years ago as a freelancer. We were living in Israel at the time. I was studying, and then we moved to Guatemala, and I just needed a way to make money online. So I just basically did anything and everything for the first few years as a freelancer. And then slowly kind of niched further and further down into B2B SaaS. Found a couple of full-time roles within that world, learned a lot full-time over those couple of years, and then jumped back out to start Beam as kind of the next building block from freelancing, then in-house, to then starting Beam with an emphasis on SME-driven content and data-backed content from my in-house experiences.
So you're 3 years in. What did the decision-making process look like from going from freelancing to, let's do an agency? What did that look like for you? Because I know you started your agency with your wife, Becca, right?
It looked like freelancing basically until COVID, and then working in-house for those 2 years and learning a lot, but then also realizing I like doing my own thing better. That combined with the type of content I was working on with my second startup was community-driven content. So we were talking to VPs of sales and RevOps professionals and CROs about what mattered to them and what they were doing in their own businesses and teams. And that approach just felt really fun and refreshing in the space because we were talking to the actual experts. So a lot of what we do at Beam, from the benchmark reports to what tech stack guides to feature pieces and interview-driven content, comes from that experience in-house and just not seeing a lot of other vendors take a similar path or a similar focus. So we really doubled down on that focus area when we launched Beam. The decision came kind of backwards. I wanted to jump out of full-time work over those 2 years. I was working maybe 60, 70, 80-hour weeks to try to work the full-time job and maintain our roster of freelance clients. At the time, my wife and I were working on it together and both doing a lot of the creative work. So then I jumped out of the full-time gigs because we couldn't do both at the same time anymore. And then just took a few months to decide, okay, are we continuing down this freelance route? Do we lean in more to a consultancy and it's more retainer-based and fractional work? Do I find another in-house role? Or do we launch this agency together with a focus on building the team of both in-house, the full-time folks, and our team of freelancers, and an emphasis on this expert-driven, data-backed content?
I'm sure I'm not alone that I feel like I went on that journey with you. And I'm not sure if you're aware of how many people actually followed that journey from you deciding that you were going to launch Beam. And because it was kind of like you were almost building an agency in public. I remember when you were going through like naming Beam and deciding how you're going to set up your processes and all that. Did you have a strong presence on LinkedIn before you started building out Beam, or was it something that built with Beam?
That's really cool to hear because, even the names, I remember doing a couple posts around, here's like the 5 names we're thinking of. So let me know what you think. And then the 5 that I pitched aren't even Beam. One of them wasn't even Beam. Very helpful process for killing your darlings is to build in public, right? Because you're like, oh, this won't get the reception I was thinking. But yeah, it kind of happened concurrently. I'm very grateful for the two in-house roles I had because they kind of made this happen. So my first role, the head of growth left, and I was head of content. So I just kind of took over what the head of growth had been doing in terms of engaging on LinkedIn and reaching out to sales leaders and just kind of starting this very grassroots is the wrong phrase these days, but very bottom up approach of just engaging with companies around content and helpful conversations rather than, hey, here's a pitch, like reaching out as a sales rep, right? So that was the foundation of getting active on LinkedIn. And then that actually directly led to the second role at Outreach because the two guys leading Sales Hacker for Outreach at the time saw my stuff on LinkedIn, reached out, offered me the role to focus on community content, and I jumped into that. And then that just really made me double down on being active on LinkedIn because that was basically half of my role was engaging with the sales community, finding good folks to talk to for content, sourcing panelists for webinars. So it was just all about the conversation and the content because I wasn't in a pure marketing role or a pure sales role. So I was free to just have these conversations with CROs that maybe somebody in sales couldn't because they were focused on quota attainment. So that year was just a ton of fun engaging with the community. And that meant a lot of posting and having conversations on LinkedIn. So then that really helped launch Beam because we launched Beam like 8-9 months after I quit Outreach. And we had a really solid foundation because of those couple of years engaging in the revenue space on LinkedIn.
Yeah, I feel like I'm not sure what the other people involved at Beam, how they post. I mainly follow you, but it seems to be a good mix of talking about your niche, so expert-driven content, a slice of humor, a lot of learnings in the back end of Beam, but also for others. How has all of that helped in terms of like not just building Beam's community, but from the business side? Are you getting people that will come to you on LinkedIn asking about Beam because they've seen a post or they've seen you not even necessarily talk about a service, but they've seen a post and just been like, I totally get what he's saying. I'm going to go and have a chat with him or go and check Beam out? Or how is that held with the business sales side of Beam?
Yeah, it's a great question that, to be honest, I don't have a great or like winning answer to because there's two sides of the coin. One side of the coin, all of Beam's growth has been from just our consistent active presence on LinkedIn, all been organic from the Beam page, from our team's pages, and from my page, and all from taking a very doubling down on that organic approach to social, like you're saying, this balance between let's not take ourselves too seriously. Let's not like make this pitchy or feel the need to make every post have a CTA to check out our content or a new offer or whatever. So it's been a very the generous term for it is a very organic approach to organic content. The less generous is it's been a very laissez-faire approach to organic content and business development for Beam. So those are the two sides of the coin. Yes, it's worked for Beam. The other side of the coin is I don't know how much of this is like repeatable or actually good advice necessarily, because I do recognize there are folks who have dialed in like LinkedIn content machine, have their carousels and clear branding and the messaging, and most of their posts tie back to the $299 course that they're selling and have really figured it out, and that's working. So I'm not going to like put a value judgment on one approach over the other, but I do think because of our positioning of we're your content partner, we're helping you set up a content program, we're having the conversations with customer success and with sales and with products and with product marketing that you wish you were having or that you know you need to have, and then reorienting your content strategy so that it's based off of your actual customer perspectives and your internal SMEs perspectives and your partners perspectives. Sorry, now I'm getting a little soapboxy, but
I love
because that's our approach, I think our more natural approach on social has been helpful, where it really is just, we just want to put stuff out there to either help you in your job, help you as a freelancer, or to make you smile and laugh about something that's ridiculous in the world of B2B SaaS. And that has really worked because we don't have like I wouldn't call it like a strong machine where we get all these inbound leads to the website and then we're tracking them there. And then we have the whole nurture set up. Like there's still a lot of stuff we need to figure out on that front, but we do get a consistent drip of entirely inbound leads by way of directly from social to the website to booking the sales call, or an intro from someone who hasn't even worked with us, but has seen our content and just saw a post and was like, hey, you should talk to this person. Or even not sales related, we get tons of great introductions to folks in the content space, to freelancers, to the folks adjacent to what we're doing. So we're just kind of slowly building this network over time.
So no paid ads, none of that, all organic.
But we've like dabbled a tiny bit in outbound messages, not even email, but maybe a couple hundred of those. It's not like we launched a big campaign or have something always on. So yeah, no paid, no outbound. It's just all been organic inbound.
That's really cool.
So far.
I understand that what you're saying, it might not be repeatable, and obviously someone shouldn't go and scrape all your posts and just replace Beam with their agency's name. But I think
some people have tried doing.
Oh, really? Okay, well. But on the back of that, have you got kind of guidance within your team that you try and post a certain amount of times, or you think something's interesting, so you'll post about it, and Becca might think something's interesting and she'll post about it, and then the Beam company LinkedIn page is posting customer testimonials and examples of your work. Do you have a strategy, or is it, again, a little bit loose?
Bit of both. There's no strategy, but it is pretty loose. I mean, like we have a baseline established with our team. The idea or ideal is that they're posting a couple times each week, at least, just to have the whole team active, and not just for like the posting and reach, but to be part of the conversation, because you can have interesting conversations in the DMs and the comment section. The other is we all know when Beam content is going out. So it gets shared out in Slack and then gets asked to share around, and everybody can make their own posts about it, because we don't want the like, hey, we have a new blog post, go check it out type of approach. So there's more of a strategy around what we're covering with our long form content on the site. And then it's kind of up to the team to distribute it according to their own voice or piece that they found interesting. So that's like the baseline. And then we all are very much on the same page of what we want our approach on social to be. Like I have an article up in the darkroom, the Beam blog, on like these 5 principles we try to move forward in. And it's things like we've already been talking about, like keeping it personal. Like don't try talking about things in grandiose terms. Like you were saying a few minutes ago, like here's something I ran in today. Here's a conversation I had yesterday. Here's something I read that I thought was interesting. Here's a struggle or a challenge I'm running into. Like make it personal to your experience and what you're running into, on through to like keep it in perspective. We don't need every post to lead to X new followers or X amount of traffic to the site. We just need it to be a valuable part of the conversation, because there's a lot of benefits that can come from it other than just direct sales.
How are you making sure that this isn't a time suck for you? Because you're still got an agency to run, right? I'm intrigued, especially for the rest of your team members as well. How are you balancing sitting on LinkedIn for 3 hours, replying to everyone and doing the community management kind of thing, and keeping things streamlined, I guess, for a better word, when someone does come into your inbox? Have you got a template there that you will reply to send them to the site, or do you just approach each conversation as it comes? And with the other team members, are you telling them to reply and say, go to the website and fill out this form and someone will get back to you? What does that back end part of it look like? Because the worst thing that could happen for you guys is you're putting in all this time and effort to make your voices heard and make an impact on LinkedIn, and then you'll have people slipping through the cracks. So I'm just wondering what that looks like, how you're managing that.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And to be honest, something we're trying to address this year. So on the, again, 2 sides of the coin, you can spend too much time or not enough time, too much effort or not enough effort. The last few years have definitely applied the Pareto principle, 80-20 principle pretty liberally, where I'm like, okay, I started out as a writer. That's where I operate most of my time still, or at least how my brain works. So I can write up a post and rarely takes me more than 20 minutes. So I'm like, okay, if I can at least do a post every day or most days of the week, that's time well spent, because it doesn't take me much time, but it makes things consistent. And it gets us this idea of, we're not quite building in public in terms of like every month we put out a numbers type of thing, but just showing, here's what's going on at Beam today. Here's what we're thinking about. Here's what we're talking about. And that's very much the 20% effort for 80% of the results, where we still get the DMs, we still get the traffic to the site consistently. We're still getting inbound leads. But I do think there's that 20% that we're leaving on the table, which is the other side of the coin of letting some things slip through the cracks. Because like you said, I don't want to be spending 3 hours on LinkedIn every day. And there's two things I think you can do. One, I think we're doing well, and one not so well. Number one is we at least have our CRM Copper connected to LinkedIn via, I think the connector is called Surf. So any DM, comment, profile, I can add into our CRM with a click of a button. So when I get DMs that express interest, that's when I start adding them into our CRM, when there's an actual sales conversation going on, right? Our deal flow is not crazy. So it's not like we're dealing with hundreds of inbound leads or need a dozen new customers every month. We want maybe one or two each month, or a handful in a quarter. So there's some basic connections that can help close those gaps and not have it be entirely manual, or at least it's added as a record so you remember to follow up on a DM, right? Where I do think there's holes is earlier stage folks. Like currently, I don't consider somebody a lead until they've raised their hand saying, I want to talk to you about content, or B, they've actually booked a first sales call. So all the folks who have engaged with our content on the website or on social, I think that's kind of the next stage is, okay, they might not be raising their hands as in they're ready for a sales conversation, but they are interested in engaging with us in our content. So this year is more about capturing that interest and re-engaging with them in a way that feels still true to Beam and our consultative, non-direct sales approach.
But in a way, I mean, we've just ran through all of your leads are organic. You don't have that pressure of paid. So in a way, like you're saying, you don't need 20 people coming in every month. Does that play into it at all? Like you've managed to build this organic funnel, basically. You don't have the pressure of spending 10, 20K on LinkedIn every month to try and recoup your costs, right? So I guess, as you're saying, like two sides of the coin. Yes, you're not handling a massive amount of inbound, but also you're not chasing your tail either in terms of ad spend. So
yeah, double-edged sword. We are, there's no paid spend to recoup customer acquisition cost. I'm sure it's maybe a few dozen dollars or something once you account for our time, but in terms of actual spending, it's zero.
You should put that on your tagline. CAC costs a couple of $12.
$12. That's great.
I like it.
Yeah, not so much for our clients, but they're selling to like enterprise. It also means so the reason we want to go this direction of actually nurturing engaged leads and actually considering leads to be leads earlier in the process is just putting us in a different position where we can have a legitimate wait list. It's not just like a marketing ploy, right? And this might not go over so well, but where we can be a little bit pickier with who we work with, because we have a very specific vision for what we do, why we do it, our process, our program. And not everybody is a fit for that. They might not have the right team in place or the right priorities, and that's fine. That's where we start pointing them to our SEO partners or individual freelancers with more flexibility, folks who don't focus on what we focus on. But I think a slightly higher lead volume will help us with the qualification process and actually narrow in on best fit clients, which then after 6 to 12 months is going to start helping us on the retention front.
I'm interested in how you're qualifying and disqualifying clients. What parameters have you got set up? Because you're right, you don't want someone coming in that isn't a good fit for what your agency does either, because that's going to be a bad fit and it's going to end in tears for everyone. So what parameters have you got set up there to disqualify or qualify?
Yeah, there's a few that have remained relevant throughout the last few years, even as we've shifted slightly. So number one, as we dug into doing the work, we realized we're working primarily with brand marketers, product marketers, internal comms folks, and less actual pure content marketers. So we've kind of reoriented a little bit in terms of the actual persona that we work with most commonly. But in terms of the companies, it's remained consistent. So it's usually Series B and beyond, not just because of size and funding, but also kind of content maturity. Earlier stage companies need other things that we don't do by design. So like SEO, for example, if you're an early stage company, and especially if you're self-service or have a direct call to action, you probably should be investing a good amount in SEO, and we don't do SEO. What we're trying to work with are companies who have all the foundations in place and are looking to go deeper because they're moving up market, or because they have a new product suite on the market, or there's some business shift that requires a shift in their content. So Series B and beyond is number one. Number two is just setting a hard project minimum per month. Again, not just so we're capturing the largest possible slice of the budget, but because of the content program we're working out, like you can't do it well at $4,000 a month. Like you're just not going to get enough content. So it kind of sets the threshold. And then number three, which is also maybe a little controversial, is a deal breaker is working directly with the CEO. If there's not a director or VP that they have in place who's owning content, even if they're not in a content role, that's 95% of the time a pass for us, just because we want to see the team dedicated and bought into this idea around content, rather than feeling like we have to sell the CEO on it every time we have a new pitch or a new idea, or are turning around new content.
What does that conversation look like? Like if a VP of marketing is coming to you and you say, oh, what, is the CEO on board? How does that go?
It looks like that. We have some really good conversations. So there's usually two and then potentially a third conversation. First one is, tell me where you're at. Open-ended. It's not us like selling our services. It's let's understand where you're at. And that's one of the questions I ask is, okay, you're saying you want to do this, this, and this. That sounds awesome. Where's your CEO at with that? Where's your board at with that? And just to get their take on internal buy-in. And our prospects are not typically shy about sharing the context. They'll be honest when they're bought in, and they'll be honest when they're saying, oh, actually, this is something I'm still kind of selling internally, and I'd love your help on selling it internally. And if that's the direction to go, and we're working with the VP to prove something out, that's 100% something we can dial in on and help with. Where it doesn't work is when the VP says, oh yeah, our CEO has really strong opinions about XYZ, and I expect that they'll probably want eyes on deliverables before and after they go into production, that kind of thing. And then that's more of a red flag for us.
Quite smart, actually, because you're kind of reverse engineering or kind of killing a problem before it exists, right? Because we all know what it's like when you have a really good idea and it gets watered down by the time it actually gets to production. So in a sense, during the qualification process, you're saying everyone needs to be on board with what we think is best for you. And this is, at the same time, that's also helping Beam succeed, right? Because if you get into these companies and spend 3-6 months on producing thought leadership content, and then the CEO's not on board and trying to water it down, it's going to impact you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why it's a deal breaker for us, because it's the lesson learned the hard way when I was freelancing, and then even in the first part of Beam, like making some more leeway for that, but then realizing it almost never has a positive outcome. But I'm hoping it doesn't sound like anti-CEO, because we're not. Just a CEO by design has so much on their plate. I love content. I think content is really important to drive a brand forward. I also don't think the CEO should be spending their time on content. Like, I can say content is important and say it's not important enough for the CEO to be tweaking titles or topics or how we talk about a specific theme. I think those conversations can happen earlier in the process, and that's why you have your SVP of brand marketing and then a content marketing lead who reports up to them. That's their job, and that's what you're paying them for and trusting them with. They just often come with strong opinions without the time or even experience in content to back that up.
Do you reckon Beam's presence kind of helps make you an easier sell in that point? Just say the CEO gets pitched this by the SVP of marketing, they're able to actually go and check you out, right? Your work is everywhere. And I know that you offer services like brand building and LinkedIn building for brands. So I'm assuming that also helps overcome an objection here. And it's kind of like a full circle moment by the work that you're putting in on the public face of the company.
Yeah, it definitely helps, especially the content itself, because if sometimes there's doubts from our point of contact's boss, whether it's the VP or the CEO or the CMO, about the expert driven approach, for example. Like, how do we find folks? Who are we talking to? What is this even about? And that's where we can point them to our existing articles. Or if they have a gap in their content operations and there's like struggling to get things through production, we have a whole article on our process and on project management, which can be helpful. So content itself can definitely build trust by showing rather than telling. And then I don't know about for CEOs specifically, but there definitely are instances where we'll get an intro and then the person will be like, oh yeah, I'm aware of you because of XYZ. Or we'll have them checking out our content before the call, or we actually sign up to work with them. And then our actual point of contact, like their direct report, is also aware of us and ready and excited to work with us. So it is definitely helpful.
That's really cool. I just want to ask you about something that you talked about in your qualification or disqualification process, a set minimum spend. And I'm wondering how you price projects in general. Is it a retainer model that you try to operate on? Do you do one-off projects? And is the aim to do long-term retainers for companies? Or how do you approach that side of the business?
Yeah, good question. It's been constant tinkering for the last few years with the best approach and with the best service lines and what to emphasize and all of that. So ongoing, but it is essentially a project rate. So we'll hear what they need. We'll lay out a couple of different options for the scope of work to move forward on, confirm those deliverables that they want and the timeline they want. And then that translates into a project total and then a monthly invoice amount. So if it's project total is 120K for the year, monthly invoice is 10K per month. And then we have some aspects of the contract that protect them and protect us. So it's like 30-day cancellation clause. Payment is not dependent on completion of deliverable. Like invoice will not adjust up or down if there's delays from the client side, like putting some protections in place, right? But it basically boils down to a fixed monthly project rate because we want things consistent for them, for finance, for procurement. Just makes things easier. In terms of the actual pricing, it still boils down to kind of a per deliverable rate. So articles are 2,000, case studies are 2,500, long form guides and ebooks are anywhere from 6K to 15K, depending on length and design and all of that. But we do all of that upfront and then put it into the scope of work. That got a little bit rambly, but hopefully.
No, I like it. Does each of those services have different margins that you're aiming for?
Yeah, our operating margin of 70% is kind of our benchmark for ourselves. So as we price things out with our contractors, freelancers, designers, that's what we use as our baseline.
Mm-hmm. And what does that look like, digging into that a little bit more, actually pricing? Is it going on your experience? Are you using, time tracking or something like that at the start of the project to kind of scope out how long things are going to take? Do you set a price and then you revisit it after, say, a 3-6 month period and then adjust? Or how does it work?
Again, a lot of tinkering and experimentation while not being too committed to, this is going to sound bad, but scientific approach. Like, I feel like any insight here, I have like the two sides of this. So number one, largely based in experience and honestly, like my gut and napkin math, at least early days. Our original pricing sheet was based off of calculations of how much we'd be paying to get it produced, how much time from the full-time team it will take to work on it, and their hourly, effective hourly rate. And then that basically gave us with the margin in mind, it gave us the minimum we would need to charge, the ideal we could charge, and then a maximum. So it gave us like a few, okay, if we're above 1,600 on this, then we're break even. If we're at 2,000, then we have a healthy margin. It accounts for our time, it accounts for our processes, and so on. So we did put math into the original pricing. It was also based off of just almost a decade of freelancing and knowing what people would pay and what they wouldn't pay, what we were worth and what we weren't worth yet. Because I think agencies have a reputation for just overcharging, and then just as the agency gets bigger, the pricing gets more inflated without adding more value. So early on, it was based off of that math and my own freelancing experience, and then looking at it, just a handful of competitors. Like got some competitive intelligence around pricing for our closest competitors, and that really helped level set where we are. So we kind of like placed ourselves right in the middle, where we weren't the most expensive, even though we thought and still think our processes are a lot more dialed in, but we're also not the cheapest because we're trying to be more of the elevated, quote unquote, option.
Yeah. I've heard another interview that you did. I can't remember who you were talking to, but you were talking about how when you were a freelancer, you were constantly like undervaluing your own work. And then when you started talking to other freelancers, you're like, oh my God, I could be charging a lot more because my work's really good. And did you ever run into that problem at Beam when you're hiring freelancers, you're hiring X, Y, and Z, and you're having to kind of like build out this operation, right? It's not just you as a freelancer, there's people to pay. How did you get comfortable with charging X for an ebook, Y for a report? Was that something that you had to learn to get comfortable with, or was it the napkin math help?
I think actually the freelancing experience and napkin math stage of freelancing helped because, over a few years after having that realization of, oh, I'm dramatically undervaluing myself, over a few years before starting my full-time role, I just increased. It was very unscientific. I just increased my rates by at least 20, 30% every time I signed a new client. And then I would go to the next prospect and be like, here's the pricing. And they would say yes, or they would say no. And people kept saying yes until after 2 or 3 years, then I started getting not more no's than yeses, but no more no's than I used to. And I was saying, okay, this is about the threshold or expectation, or at least when I need to start being more scientific about it. On the one hand, the freelance experience really helped because I can come into a sales call and pretty confidently give an estimate, give what I think is fair pricing based off of where they're at and their budget and our own operations, and kind of go through the same experiment the last few months where we're realizing, okay, some of our freelancers have increased their pricing, other costs have increased, inflation the last few years has gone crazy, right? So we do need an adjustment to our pricing. We haven't done it as often as when I was freelancing every single new client, but we are experimenting with, okay, if we're pulling in design and the long form and this element and the survey and pulling all of this off of their plate, what does it look like to price the report at 15K instead of 12K? So just starting to pitch that and see how it's received. And we're getting projects around the new pricing that we think reflects our value in 2025.
Do you reflect that price when there is an increase and when you notice that there needs to be an increase because of inflation and freelancer rates, obviously, all your other costs go up? What about your existing clients that are already with you? Do you kind of eat that as an agency, or do you give them warning, or what does that look like?
Yeah, it's a mix. Sometimes we'll eat a slightly lower margin in the interest of a long relationship, or somebody who has worked with us at one client company and then jumped jobs and brought us back in. Like, we value that. I don't even want to call it loyalty because that almost feels icky, but we value those relationships above nearly anything, right? Because some of our clients not only have switched companies and brought us back in, but have also sent us referrals, and it's just been fantastic and really educational to work with. So it's not like every time when I was freelancing, even with existing clients, it would be up for a new scope of work. And I would say, hey, by the way, my rate went from 30 cents a word to 40 cents a word. Here's the new rates as we start this conversation. We haven't done that with Beam clients because of that long-term relationship approach. But this year we will start to, because some especially are like cornerstone pieces and the reports that we're digging into with survey design and design on the tail end for data visualization has just gone a lot deeper. So now we're talking, 15 to 18K instead of 9 to 12K. And that will be something we'll prepare them for, like, the month before renewal, we have that conversation and we say, here's a new pricing, here's what we offer, here's what it's sounding like your needs are. What do we want this new scope to look like?
I'm curious how you balance in terms of scale, right? I know at the start of the conversation we talked about how you don't have this massive inbound funnel. Maybe you're getting one or two new customers a month or one or two conversations that you're starting. How do you manage scaling on either like a monthly or a quarterly or an annual basis in terms of, we think we've got 100K worth of new business coming in, we need to hire X, Y, and Z to make that happen? Is that something that you look at maybe the year before you know that this is coming in, say 2025, and you start mapping that out? I'm interested in how you manage that side of the business.
Yeah. Again, take it with a grain of salt. And this might not be the right business strategy. But so first off, we've avoided saying yes to projects that feel way too big for us to bite off, even if it's been like, it doesn't happen super often, to be honest. But, there's one that was like 300,000 and we're like, okay, we could, but it would mean this extra hire and this change in our contractors. And it would shift our whole structure and team for the sake of one client project, which just didn't really feel like it set us up for long-term success, or avoiding a situation where 6 months in somebody churns and we end up having to lay somebody off anyway. So again, we value the team and want to avoid those scenarios. So we've tried to avoid biting off too much in a way that would require bringing somebody new on. That said, the approach we have taken is forecasting 3 to 6 months out with ongoing conversations, because sometimes things close in a few weeks, sometimes it's a few months. So we try to look far enough out of maybe they don't come back until June, but we think they're closing the first half of this year. And that helps get a picture of, okay, with the 15 active conversations we have right now that are bottom funnel, who do we think will close and when? And then we plan out the following month's revenue, because we have net 30, and just look at what our revenue will support in terms of team or contractor growth in those future months. So that helps us with the hiring decision of looking ahead. Like right now, they're starting as fractional, but we're bringing in a project manager and essentially like a systems champion to keep us on track with our project management and tasks and client communication and documentation and all of that. And the timing on that came from January, looking ahead, okay, here's what we need to close to maybe be able to make that happen. And then now looking in March, okay, looking back, we've closed these 3 new projects these past 6 weeks. In April, we'll be at this level of revenue. So we now have the right baseline to bring in those 2 additional hires.
I think that's like super interesting, because I was talking to another agency owner last week and he said the same thing. He'll look at the pipeline ahead, and then he likes to work with fractional, especially when he's launching new services. He'll use the fractional help, and then it's easy to scale up and down. And then he has like a base of like core FTEs, and it sounds like you have the same setup. You have a base of core FTEs, and you're bringing in new people to help optimize project management and processes. And then I'm assuming a good chunk of the actual writing work is where you use the fractional help. Is it just writing that you use for fractional, or is it design?
There's kind of 3 different areas. There's the full-time employees. There's just 4 of us full-time on the team. And then there's more of the contractor fractional level. So we have our managing editor, Riviera, there, Achila and other designers and copywriters. So where it's more like project-based or hourly-based type work rather than like deliverable-based work. So we set up a retainer or hourly approach with them. And then there's our freelance writers, and that's with the deliverable-based work. We're paying you to write 4 articles a month, for example. And they're the most flexible in terms of managing their own time and schedule, and some have more bandwidth than others. So we just match them with 1 or 2 client projects at a time.
And what does the process look like when you're taking on, say, one of the bigger projects? just say an ebook or a research study, what does that look like from planning and initial discussion right out to like planning the freelancers and the fractional help and internally as well to deliverable of the client? What does that look like on the back end?
There's about a 6 to 8 week transition period from when we kick off with a client. So number one is I'm having sales conversations and then introducing them to our head of client success and strategy, Sabina, at the tail end of that. Then Sabina and I handle getting the contract signed. She runs the kickoff call and kind of starts taking on the handoff of project manager, account manager at that stage. And I turn more into consultant mode on strategy. So she leads that first kickoff month of running the internal interviews, talking to her points of contact, reviewing internal documentation, and putting it together into our project guide with themes and personas and pain points and topics. So the basis of an editorial calendar. Then at the end of that month, we have a recap call with the client, Sabina, myself, and our content producer, Kat, who's a full-time employee as well. And at that point, that's the start of the transition from me and Sabina to Sabina and Kat. So then moving forward, Sabina is still their primary point of contact and strategist on the account. And Kat is the primary producer of getting things moving, working with our freelancers, assigning things out, reviewing stuff on the tail end after it goes through our managing editor. So she works most directly with our fractional support and with our freelance writers.
How much transparency do your clients have into that process? Can they see like your project management dashboard, or are they just getting weekly updates on where something's at in the pipeline?
Yeah, we have a few options for them. Number one, they have a client view in our project management tool, and they have a few links there. They have like a milestone view so they can see the specific dates. There's a few subtasks that are milestones for it, like on our end, and then submission to client and then client review, so they can see all of those to get their action items. They can also see the editorial calendar in like a Gantt view. They get access to the guide, kind of what we're using as the basis for the project. And then we also, our client lead, Sabina, sends out a weekly recap on Slack each week with like, here's our open action items and where we're at. Here's your open action items and what we need from you. Here's the net new content submitted for the week. Because they can get all of that in the project management tool in the portal, but we also just send it every week in Slack to keep things front and center.
But I think that level of transparency, like giving them the client view, is really cool. I'm assuming it helps build trust in the process, and maybe they don't feel like they need to be constantly checking in on where things are at because they can just go look at it themselves, right? Was that a conscious decision you made to kind of open it up and, you know, not hide anything, and they can just go and check where things are whenever they want?
That's the idea. I mean, all about self-serve and SaaS, right? This is the best we can do for self-serve as a tiny agency. Okay, at least you can dig into the project management yourself. And they do have transparency in their, like sometimes that question comes up in the sales process of who are your writers? How are they trained? How do you work with them? So there's full transparency in terms of our full-time team and what we focus on and walk them through, our fractional support and our writers. But then in terms of access, they're going solely through Sabina and Kat rather than any of our contractors.
All right, I've got one last question because it wouldn't be a podcast if I didn't ask. Are you using AI for anything right now?
Oh, yeah, good question. We are, and it's a current conversation with the team in terms of how we talk about this thing as a content agency, right? I'm holding two things at the same time. One, I don't want to be like old man on my front lawn yelling, get off my lawn with AI. Like, I get it's transformative. It's a huge game-changing piece of technology. On the other end, I have not seen it be able to replicate the work that we do. And I don't say that in a conceited way. It also can't replicate what Grizzle is doing or what any other of these agencies that are hyper-focused on quality content can do yet. So our guidance is we do not and cannot use it for anything generative, like to create a new idea, whether that's an outline, topic ideation, first drafts, hooks, copy, anything. We just leave it off because at the end of the day, our clients are paying us for our strategy, our experience, and our creativity. And if we're using AI, we're ripping them off, I think. What we are using it for, and what I see as the immediate most promising use case for content marketers specifically, is to surface and organize existing insights and thoughts. So the primary use case for us right now is in onboarding. We have a tool called Marvin, which is supposed to be like a research tool, not a content tool, but it works really well for this. And we can put all of the clients' documentation, their sales decks, their customer recordings, the interviews that we run with internal SMEs and with leadership. We can put that all into one project in Marvin. And then we can actually, then it kind of creates a tiny mini little LLM, tiny LLM. I get the oxymoron, but you know what I mean? Like, it's not pulling from public information. It's pulling from the 36 files we've put in the project. So that can be really helpful for like quickly going back to a transcript for an interview we've read, for pulling up information from a deck that we know we saw, but we couldn't remember where we saw it from, to start with the content strategy and a starting point for topic ideation and content strategy. What we won't use it for is then saying, okay, based off of all of this, can you give me 10 topic ideas? Because that's where I think we leave out a lot of gold, because AI will inevitably move to the lowest common denominator rather than look for the unique angles and the unique insights and the unique data points that are actually going to be engaging.
What you've just said is basically on par with everyone else's answers that I've asked, in terms of not going to use it for actual content ideation, that kind of thing. But in terms of doing the stuff that you would already be doing, that's such a time suck. Yeah, that's like really cool. And in terms of creating like the mini LLM, when I talked to Tom over at Grizzle, he had kind of the same use case. They've trained an LLM to, they will throw a LinkedIn post in and they've trained it to like kind of poke holes in their argument. And then they use that to like refine, and then they throw it back and it pokes holes again. So it's almost like a sparring partner. I think he said they stole it from Erica, their old head of content.
Oh,
that
yeah.
idea.
Sparring is her thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And I just thought that was such a cool use case, because you're not using recycled ideas that have been scraped off the internet, right? It's just basically they're training this tool to kind of spar instead of, using another human. So I guess the cool thing about this is maybe just learning to embrace it in areas of the agency or the work that we're already doing without it being a creativity killer. So what you've just said is basically on point with what other people have been saying in terms of the use case.
Yeah. And it works as a research tool too. Like, if you consider it a replacement for Google, not a replacement for a writer, I think that's great. You can ask ChatGPT all you want for background information.
For sure. And like the deep research that they're doing now, it's improving every day. So yeah, it's pretty cool. I prep for some of our interview doing it. That's how I found some of your old interviews. It just scraped them rather than me just crawling through YouTube. So I think we're all using it just in our own ways. So
yeah, points in AI's favor and your favor, because it definitely feels like one of the more very well prepared interviews. So
thank you so much.
AI.
Thank you, AI. Thank you so much. Yeah. All right, Brooklyn, let's round it out. Why don't you just tell everyone where they can find you and where they can find Beam?
Yeah, you can find me and Beam on LinkedIn primarily. Just search my name, Brooklin Nash, or you can find Beam's stuff and the Darkroom blog, where we have a good amount of articles on project management to editing at beamcontent.co. Awesome. We are no longer on X, so find us on LinkedIn or our website.
Sorry, Elon. All right.
Sorry, not sorry.
Yeah, that's it. Thanks so much, Brooklyn.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you.